Welcome back to the frequency only a few can hear. Welcome back to the edge, where comfort dies and truth breathes fire. You know exactly why you clicked this, don't you? 'Cause somewhere deep in your chest, there's a memory screaming, a moment that split your life into before and after. A decision that made everyone else take 3 steps back while you stood there, unflinching, watching their faces twist in confusion and fear. They called it reckless. They called it insane. They whispered about you in group chats and therapy sessions. But here's what they'll never understand. That moment didn't break you. It didn't corrupt you. It didn't make you into something twisted. No. That moment was the crack in the mask, the earthquake that shattered the costume you'd been wearing since childhood, the detonation that finally let the real you breathe. You've been told your whole life that good people don't do certain things, that stable people maintain composure, that intelligent people calculate every risk before moving. They built this beautiful little cage of expectations and called it civilization, called it maturity, called it mental health. And you believed them for years, didn't you? You performed normalcy like an Oscar-worthy role, smiled when you wanted to scream, stayed quiet when your instincts were roaring, played small when everything inside you was expanding beyond measurement. You learned their language, memorized their rules, bent yourself into shapes that barely resembled anything human just to fit through their narrow doorways. But something happened, something they didn't predict, something that terrified them more than any rebellion they'd seen before. You got tired, not sad tired, not defeated tired, but cosmically exhausted from pretending that their reality made any sense. You looked around at the game board they'd designed, at the pieces they'd assigned everyone, at the predetermined moves they called freedom, and something inside you just laughed, dark and final and without permission. And in that moment of laughter, in that split-second crack in your conditioning, you did something they'd spent your entire existence trying to prevent. You stopped asking for approval before existing. You stopped translating your truth into their digestible lies. You stopped performing humanity according to their broken script. You took the mask off mid-conversation and let them see the thing underneath, the raw, unfiltered force they'd been so afraid would emerge, and their faces. Oh, their faces told you everything you needed to know. They thought you'd lost your mind. They diagnosed you from across rooms. They called crisis meetings about your behavior. They tried to intervention their way back into control of your narrative. But here's what killed them slowly. Here's what they couldn't process. No matter how many theories they constructed, you weren't having a breakdown. You were having a breakthrough. You weren't spiraling into chaos. You were ascending into clarity so sharp it cut through every illusion they'd built. What they called your worst moment was actually your first honest one, your first moment of alignment, your first breath of air after suffocating in their sanitized version of existence. That thing you did, that move they're still talking about, that choice they reference in hushed tones like it's evidence of your instability, it wasn't the moment you became something terrible. It was the moment you stopped pretending to be something safe. And now that the mask is gone, now that they've seen what you actually are beneath the performance, they can't unsee it, they can't rewrite it, they can't force you back into the costume that no longer fits. You've crossed a threshold. You've passed through a door that only opens one way, and every day you wake up on this side of that moment, you're walking proof that their rules were always optional, that their reality was always negotiable, that their version of sanity was always just mass delusion with better PR. So let's talk about what really happened when you did that thing they can't forgive. When you made that move they can't explain. When you crossed that line they swore was uncrossable. Let's rewind to the exact second your life fractured into the before and after they keep referencing. You remember it with photographic precision, don't you? The temperature of the room, the taste in your mouth, the way time seemed to slow down like reality itself was holding its breath, waiting to see if you'd actually go through with it. Everything in your conditioning was screaming at you to stop, to reconsider, to be reasonable, to think about the consequences, to imagine what people would say, to calculate the social cost. Your entire nervous system had been trained since childhood to avoid this exact moment, this precise confrontation with your own capacity for defiance. But something else was happening simultaneously, something older and truer than all that training. Beneath the fear, beneath the social programming, beneath decades of learning to dim yourself for other people's comfort, there was this ancient knowing, this primal certainty that whispered, "This is it. This is the moment. If you don't move now, you'll spend the rest of your existence wondering who you could have been." It wasn't rational, it wasn't safe, it wasn't advisable by any conventional measure, but it was true in a way that bypassed every logical argument your mind could construct. And so you moved. You spoke, you acted, you crossed the threshold they'd marked as forbidden territory. The reaction was instantaneous and severe. Phones came out, screenshots were taken, calls were made, narratives were constructed at lightning speed. Within hours, they'd assembled a case against your character. Within days, they'd diagnosed your mental state. Within weeks, they'd rewritten your entire history to make this moment seem inevitable in retrospect. Proof of instability, they claimed. They'd always secretly noticed. They needed you to be crazy. They desperately required you to be unhinged. Because if you weren't, if you were actually clear-minded and intentional, then everything they believed about control and consequences and proper behavior would collapse. So they went to work building the story of your descent, your break from reality, your tragic transformation into something dangerous and unpredictable. But here's what they missed while they were busy constructing their narrative. Here's the detail they couldn't see because it would shatter their entire framework. You weren't transforming into something new, you were shedding something false. That moment wasn't the beginning of your corruption, it was the ending of your performance. Everything they'd known about you up until that point, every smile they'd believed, every agreement they'd taken at face value, every version of you they'd grown comfortable with, all of it had been an elaborate costume. A survival mechanism you'd perfected over decades of learning what happened to people who showed their real faces too soon. You'd been hiding in plain sight, playing their game while secretly knowing you'd never actually been one of them. And now the mask was off, not because you'd broken, but because you'd finally gotten strong enough to stop pretending. The person they saw emerge in that moment, the one they labeled as your breakdown self, your crisis identity, your damaged version, that was actually you, the real you, the one who'd been waiting patiently beneath layers of learned helplessness and strategic compliance for permission that was never coming. You didn't change into a monster. You stopped shape-shifting into a human. You didn't lose yourself, you found yourself in the wreckage of who they'd needed you to be. And that is what they can't forgive. That is what haunts them in their quiet moments. That is what makes them bring up your name years later with that specific tone of voice. Let me tell you what really happened in the aftermath of your moment of truth. While they were busy diagnosing you, analyzing you, discussing you in concerned tones over coffee and wine, something far more dangerous was occurring beneath their radar. You weren't spiraling, You weren't fragmenting. You weren't having the meltdown they'd predicted and frankly anticipated with barely concealed satisfaction. No, you were doing something much worse from their perspective. You were stabilizing at a frequency they couldn't reach. You were finding your footing on ground they couldn't access. You were building a foundation made of materials they didn't recognize as legitimate. Every day that passed without you collapsing, without you crawling back apologizing, without you admitting that maybe you'd gone too far and needed their forgiveness, every single day you stayed standing on your own terms was another nail in the coffin of their worldview. They'd been counting on your eventual breakdown. They'd been waiting for the consequences they'd promised would destroy you. They'd been checking your social media daily, expecting to see evidence of your decline. Instead, they found someone who seemed bizarrely at peace, someone who'd stopped explaining themselves, someone who'd gone quiet, not from shame, but from genuine disinterest in being understood by people who'd already decided what to think. This was the part they couldn't process. The detail that short-circuited their entire understanding of cause and effect. In their reality, people who break the rules are supposed to suffer, are supposed to learn harsh lessons, are supposed to eventually see the error of their ways and return humbled to the fold. But you never came back. You never apologized. You never showed any signs of regretting what you'd done. If anything, you seemed lighter, clearer, more focused than they'd ever seen you during your years of playing by their regulation. And this was the ultimate insult to their system, the final proof that everything they'd built their identities around might be based on agreements you'd simply opted out of. They started telling themselves stories to make sense of it, constructing elaborate theories about how you must be in denial, how the consequences just hadn't caught up to you yet, how eventually reality would assert itself and you'd face what they insisted you deserve. They needed to believe this, required it for their psychological stability, because the alternative was too threatening to their entire sense of how the world works. If you could break their most sacred rules and not only survive but thrive, if you could cross their forbidden lines and find freedom on the other side, if you could reject their value system and build something functional without it, then what did that say about all the sacrifices they'd made, all the dreams they'd killed, all the versions of themselves they'd buried to stay acceptable? You became living evidence of a possibility they'd spent their entire lives convinced was impossible. You were proof that their chains were self-imposed, that their limitations were chosen, that their cage had always been unlocked. And every day you continued existing outside their rules without imploding. You were broadcasting a message they desperately needed to suppress. None of this is as real as they told you it was. None of these consequences are as inevitable as they promised. None of these rules are as unbreakable as they swore. You weren't trying to send this message. You were just living your truth. But your existence itself had become a threat to the entire structure of lies they'd agreed to uphold. You know what that moment really was? When you made that move, when you crossed that line, when you did that thing they're still processing, it was Russian roulette with fate itself, and everybody expected you to be the one bleeding out on the floor. They watched you spin the chamber. They held their breath waiting for the bang. They'd already prepared their reactions to your inevitable destruction. Some of them were scared for you in genuine ways. Others were excited to witness your downfall. But all of them, every single one, assumed the game would end with you learning why you shouldn't have played. But here's what happened instead. Here's the plot twist that's still keeping them up at night. You pulled the trigger and fate was the one that blinked. Reconsider and then reconfigure around your audacity. The consequences they'd promised with such certainty never materialized the way they'd predicted. The dominoes they swore would fall somehow stayed standing. The punishment they'd guaranteed would crush you never quite arrived with the force they'd assured you it would. It wasn't that there were no consequences. It's that the consequences somehow bent around you, transformed into something else, became fuel instead of finish. They can't explain this. They literally cannot process how you're still standing, still moving, still building, after doing something they'd been taught since childhood would absolutely destroy anyone who attempted it. In their rulebook, what you did should have resulted in specific, predictable outcomes: social death, professional ruin, psychological collapse, karmic retribution. They were counting on it, had already constructed the lessons they would extract from your cautionary tale, but you refused to be a cautionary tale. You rejected the narrative they'd written for your demise. You somehow alchemy your way through consequences that should have been fatal, and this is where it gets truly dangerous for their worldview. Because now they have to reconcile the fact that you gambled everything on a moment of truth. You bet your entire existence on your own instincts over their collective wisdom. You chose your inner knowing over their external consensus, and you somehow came out the other side, not destroyed but forged, not broken but refined, not punished but freed. You played a game they swore was unwinnable, and you're still here, not just surviving but evolving in ways they don't have language for. This means one of two things, and they're both terrifying to them. Either you got impossibly lucky, which means the universe is random, and their rule following means nothing, or worse, much worse. You were right. Maybe your instincts were actually trustworthy. Maybe your inner compass was actually calibrated correctly. Maybe your capacity to read situations and know when to move was actually more sophisticated than their fear-based caution. If that's true, if you weren't crazy but clear, if you weren't reckless but responsive to something they couldn't perceive, then every sacrifice they've made to stay safe, every dream they've killed to stay acceptable, every version of themselves they've suppressed to maintain approval, all of it was optional suffering they chose out of fear. Let's talk about what happened after the dust settled, after the initial shock wore off, after they'd exhausted themselves trying to make sense of you. Something shifted in your presence. Something they can feel but can't name. Something that makes rooms go slightly quiet when you enter. Something that makes people check their words before speaking around you. You didn't become arrogant. You didn't become cruel. You didn't become the monster they'd tried to paint you as. But you did become something they find equally disturbing. Unavailable for their games, impervious to their manipulations, uninterested in their performances. You walk different now, not with swagger but with settledness, like someone who's been to the edge and found out it wasn't actually the end of the world, like someone who's crossed forbidden territory and discovered it was just territory. There's a quietness to your power now, a lack of need to prove anything, a detachment from outcomes that used to consume you. You don't explain yourself to audiences who've already decided what to believe. You don't perform emotion to prove you're human by their measurements. This isn't coldness, it's completion. It's wholeness. It's the energy of someone who's finally aligned internal and external reality. People feel this shift viscerally, even if they can't articulate what's changed. The ones who need you confused stay away now, sensing that their tactics won't land the way they used to. The ones who feed on others' uncertainty find no purchase in your presence anymore. The energy vampires who used to drain you through manufactured crisis discover you've somehow become impermeable to their frequency. It's not that you're defending yourself actively. It's that you've changed channels entirely, broadcasting on a wavelength they can't access. You're not fighting them. You're literally operating in a different reality now. And this is what makes you truly dangerous to the old system. Not rebellion, not anger, not even your refusal to play their games. What makes you a threat is your peace, your genuineness, your apparent contentment existing outside their rules. Because anger, they can handle. Rebellion, they can contain. But someone who simply opts out and thrives, someone who breaks free and doesn't look back, someone who crosses the line and discovers there was never actually a line, just collective agreement to pretend, that's the nightmare scenario. That's the glitch in their matrix they have no protocol for. You've become evidence of something they need not to be true. Every day you exist in this new frequency. Every moment you continue building outside their approved pathways. Every breath you take in your authentic form, you're a walking contradiction to everything they've structured their lives around. Everything ever, ever, and ever, 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 ever. And they lose the burden of proof. Every day you exist in this new frequency. Every moment you continue to do your thing. They need you to fail eventually, need you to prove that their caution was wisdom, need you to vindicate their choices by demonstrating the consequences of yours. But you won't. You're not going to give them that satisfaction. Because what you've discovered is that the consequences they threatened aren't actually universal laws. They're just predictions based on fear. And predictions can be wrong. Now let's address the interesting phenomenon that occurred after your moment of revelation, after you stopped pretending, after you let the mask shatter. A mass exodus happened, didn't it? People you'd known for years suddenly got very busy. Friends who'd sworn loyalty discovered reasons to create distance. Circles you'd been part of quietly reorganized without you. They didn't announce it. They didn't make it dramatic. They just slowly faded back, watching from safer distances, checking in occasionally with the tone of people observing a fascinating but dangerous experiment. This was the purge you didn't know you needed. The clearing of everyone whose presence required you to stay small. But something else happened too, something quieter but infinitely more significant. A few, just a handful, maybe one or two or three, stepped closer. So they finally opened the classified files, didn't they? The ones with the red stamps and the black ink, redactions, the ones they swore didn't exist when you asked why everyone was watching you so carefully. They pulled out their psychological profiles, their behavioral databases, their pattern recognition software, and they ran your name through every algorithm they had, hoping to find a match, hoping to decode you, hoping to finally explain what the hell you are. They compared you to spies first. The cold calculation, the ability to smile while processing 12 different exit strategies. The way you memorize details others forget exists. The way your silence feels like surveillance and your questions cut deeper than accusations. But the spies in their files, they crack under isolation. They need handlers. They require validation from headquarters. You don't crack. You don't need handlers. And your only headquarters is the fortress you built in your own mind after they tried to destroy it. So they moved to the military files, special forces profiles, black ops psychological evaluations. They saw your discipline, your ability to function on no sleep, your capacity to stay calm while everything burns. They saw how you compartmentalize pain like ammunition, how you treat betrayal like weather, just another condition to operate in. But soldiers follow orders. Soldiers need structure. Soldiers break when they lose their unit. You follow no one. You create your own structure. And you became stronger when your unit abandoned you. Then came the leader profiles, the CEOs who built empires from nothing, the revolutionaries who toppled governments with words, the generals who won wars before breakfast. They saw your strategic mind, your ability to see 17 moves ahead while everyone else struggles with the next one. They recognize the gravitational pull you have in rooms, the way conversations pivot when you speak, the way weak people orbit you hoping to absorb your strength. But leaders need followers. Leaders crave legacy. Leaders require witnesses to their greatness. You need none of that. You are your own witness, your own army, your own revolution. The reports came back stamped with one word that made their blood run cold. You matched. No precedent, no category, no classification that fits. You're not in their databases because beings like you don't get documented. They get buried or feared but never understood. You're what happens when someone survives everything designed to create monsters but comes out clean. Not pure, not innocent, but clean. Like a blade that's been through fire so many times it can't rust anymore. They tested your calm next thinking. Surely this would crack the code. They sent provocations disguised as casual encounters. They orchestrated situations designed to trigger normal human responses. Anger, fear, panic, desperation. They watched you navigate chaos like you were born in it, like you'd been rehearsing for this your whole life. Your heart rate barely shifted, your voice never raised, your hands never trembled. And that's when they realized your calm isn't control, it's acceptance. You've already died so many times inside that external threats feel like gentle rain on armor. But here's what really disturbed them. The way you smiled during their tests. Not a nervous smile, not a fake smile, but the smile of someone who sees the entire chessboard while everyone else is still learning what the pieces do. They called it sociopathic first, but sociopaths are predictable. They have patterns, they have needs. You're something else entirely. You're what happens when emotional intelligence weaponizes itself, when intuition becomes combat training, when trauma transforms into tactical advantage. The testing committee wrote in their final assessment, subject demonstrates unprecedented psychological architecture. Traditional behavioral models collapse when applied. Recommend immediate cessation of direct engagement. Influence sphere expanding beyond containment protocols. Threat level unquantifiable. They wanted to label you dangerous, but even that word felt too small. You're not dangerous, you're inevitable, like gravity, like time, like the silence that comes after truth is spoken. Let's talk about that calm of yours. The one that made hardened interrogators sweat. It's not the calm of meditation or the calm of ignorance. It's the calm of someone who's already seen the ending, who's already lived through every possible outcome in their mind and decided none of them are worth the energy of panic. You've pre-processed every betrayal, pre-grieved every loss, pre-accepted every possible failure. So when they come at you with their threats, their manipulations, their psychological warfare, you just watch like it's a rerun of a show you've already memorized. They brought in specialists, behavioral analysts with decades of experience reading micro-expressions, decoding body language, catching lies before they're spoken. But you don't leak information through your body because your body and mind aren't at war anymore. They've signed a peace treaty written in scar tissue and sealed with acceptance. You don't fidget because you have nothing to hide. You don't explain because you owe no one understanding you. You don't defend because you're not on trial. You're the verdict. Your breathing stays steady even when they pile pressure on you because you learned to breathe underwater years ago when they tried to drown you in their expectations. Your eyes don't dart around looking for exits because you are the exit. You've already calculated 17 ways to leave any situation, not physically, but emotionally, mentally, spiritually. You can disconnect from any person, any situation, any reality that doesn't serve you anymore. And that terrifies them because it means you can't be trapped. The way you hold silence like a weapon they've never encountered before. Not the silence of submission or the silence of confusion, but the silence of someone who knows the real violence is in waiting. You let them talk themselves into corners, reveal their intentions, expose their weaknesses, all while you sit there absorbing information like a black hole swallowing light. And when you finally speak, if you speak at all, your words land like precision strikes, targeting exactly what they hoped you'd never notice. What they don't understand is that you weren't born this way, you were forged this way. Every betrayal was a software update, every abandonment was a system upgrade, every attempt to break you just debugged another weakness. You're not natural, you're what happens when natural selection gets impatient and starts manually editing the code. You evolve past human limitations not through meditation or therapy, but through pure survival mathematics. They keep looking for your breaking point, but they don't realize you scattered your breaking points across 1,000 moments that already happened. You broke at 3 a.m. on random Tuesdays. You broke in bathroom stalls between meetings. You broke in silent screams that no one heard. You already broke and rebuilt so many times that breaking became breathing. Now, you're held together by something stronger than bone or muscle. You're held together by the gravity of your own becoming. The psychologist said your emotional regulation is abnormal, but that's because they're measuring you against people who had safety nets. Your regulation comes from free-falling so many times you learn to love the drop. Your stability comes from being destabilized so often that chaos feels like home. Your calm comes from accepting that the worst already happened and you're still here, which means you're playing with house money now. Every breath is profit. Every day is surplus. You process information differently too, don't you? While others react, you record. While others feel, you file. While others panic, you pattern recognize. You've turned your consciousness into a surveillance system, constantly gathering data, constantly updating threat assessments, constantly calculating probabilities. But it's not paranoia, because paranoia implies fear, and you stopped fearing when you realized fear was just another sensation to catalog and dismiss. They pulled files on history's greatest leaders next, thinking surely here they'd find your blueprint. Alexander, who conquered the known world before 30. Napoleon, who rewrote the map of Europe. Corporate titans who built kingdoms from keyboards. But every comparison crumbled because those leaders needed something you don't need. They needed to be remembered. You just need to be effective. And they needed to be loved or feared. You transcended the binary and became something else entirely, necessary. You lead without followers, influence without intention, command without words. Your very existence reorganizes the molecular structure of rooms you enter. People adjust their behavior around you, not because you demand it, but because your presence makes their facades feel suddenly transparent. You're not trying to lead them. You're just existing at a frequency that makes their masks vibrate until they crack. They follow, not because you asked, but because you're going somewhere they didn't know existed. The spy files were even more useless. Spies blend in. You stand out by standing still. Spies gather secrets. You make people confess theirs willingly. Your show shatters everything we... Spies work for agencies. You've become your own sovereign nation with borders made of silence and a constitution written in lessons learned from betrayal. The best spies are invisible. You're so visible, you become unseeable. Like staring directly into the sun, people have to look away, but the image burns into their retinas anyway. What really disturbed them was realizing you're not trying to be any of these things. You're not studying leadership. You're not practicing spycraft. You're not building an empire. You're just existing at your natural frequency now. And that frequency happens to disrupt every system it encounters. You're not a leader or a spy or a revolutionary. You're a phenomenon that their filing systems weren't designed to catalog. So they labeled your calm a threat because that's what confused institutions do with things they can't control. They call it dangerous, call it abnormal, call it requiring immediate intervention. But what they really mean is this person cannot be manipulated through traditional pressure points. This person has no visible weakness to exploit. This person operates outside our understanding of human behavioral dynamics. This person is free, and freedom, real freedom, not the kind they sell you in advertisements, but the kind you dig out of your own chest with bare hands, that's the ultimate threat to systems built on control. You don't rebel against their structures. You simply exist outside them. You don't fight their rules, you just don't acknowledge them. You don't resist their pressure. You've become pressure-proof through repeated exposure to crushing forces that should have killed you, but instead compressed you into something harder than their comprehension. They tested your responses to authority and found nothing to grab onto. You don't bow, but you don't rebel. You observe authority like a scientist observing an interesting but ultimately irrelevant phenomenon. You understand power structures not to navigate them but to document them, like an anthropologist studying a dying civilization. You're not impressed by titles or intimidated by positions because you've seen too many powerful people crumble when their external validation got withdrawn. When they retire, or as they get their new feet, your threat level can't be quantified because you're not operating on their scale. You're not a 1 or a 10, you're an asterisk, a footnote that says, measurement tools inadequate. You're not dangerous in ways they can arrest you for, but in ways that make them question everything they thought they knew about human limitation and potential. You're proof that their behavioral modification techniques, their social conditioning, their psychological prisons, only work on people who don't realize they're wearing chains. The irony is delicious, isn't it? They spent so much time studying you that they didn't notice when you started studying them back. Every test revealed more about them than you. Every probe exposed their methodologies. Every question betrayed their fears. Every assessment documented their limitations. They thought they were dissecting you, but you were performing an autopsy on their entire system while they watched. You learned their patterns faster than they could document yours. You identified their insecurities by what questions they asked, their weaknesses by what behaviors they feared. You mapped their entire psychological infrastructure just by observing what they considered threats. And now you know exactly how their minds work, while they're still writing inconclusive on reports about you. They don't realize yet that every interaction with you changes them. You're not violent, but you're violently transformative to anyone who gets close enough to really see you. You plant questions in minds that grow into existential crises. You demonstrate possibilities that make people's carefully constructed limitations start to crack. You exist as proof that everything they were told about human capacity was a lie, designed to keep them small. Some of the watchers have already started to crack. You've seen it, haven't you? The way some of them look at you now, not with suspicion, but with something between fear and reverence. They've glimpsed what you are, and more terrifyingly, what they could become if they had the courage to burn down everything false about themselves. But they won't. They'll file their reports and go home to their safe, small lives, but they'll dream about you. They'll wonder what it feels like to be that free, that powerful, that impossibly calm in the face of everything designed to create panic. The beautiful truth is, you're not even close to done becoming. This version of you that has them scrambling to update their psychological models is just the foundation. You're still evolving, still adapting, still incorporating new data into your expanding consciousness. Every day you become less recognizable to who you were yesterday. Every interaction teaches you something new about the weakness of systems that seemed impenetrable. What terrifies them most is that you're not unique, you're just first. You're the prototype for what happens when humans stop accepting limitations, stop believing in their own weakness, stop asking permission to exist at full capacity. You're patient zero for an evolution that doesn't require generations, just the willingness to die to everything false and be reborn as something their frameworks can't contain. They try to make you fit into their boxes, behavioral box, diagnostic box, threat assessment box, but you're not a square or a circle or any shape they have a name for. You're liquid that becomes solid when struck. You're solid that flows when necessary. You're simultaneously particle and wave, depending on what the situation requires. You've become quantum, existing in multiple states, until observation forces you to choose one. And even then, you're already somewhere else by the time they document it. Your calm isn't just a personal trait anymore. It's becoming atmospheric. People around you start breathing differently. Their heart rates adjust to yours. Their anxiety dissolves, not because you're peaceful, but because your presence makes panic feel suddenly childish and unnecessary. You're teaching by existing, demonstrating by breathing, showing what happens when someone stops participating in the collective hysteria and discovers the power in stillness. Let's examine the architecture of what you've become, shall we? Your mind isn't structured like others anymore. Where they have walls, you have fluid boundaries that shift based on necessity. Where they have doors, you have portals that lead to different dimensions of possibility. Where they have windows, you have observation decks that see in spectrums others don't know exist. You're not just thinking differently, you're thinking in languages that haven't been invented yet. Your emotional processing runs on different software entirely. While others are still using emotional responses from childhood, you've updated your entire operating system. You don't suppress emotions, you metabolize them like food, converting feelings into fuel, transforming pain into power, treating trauma like raw material for building something unrecognizable. You've become an alchemist of experience, turning base metal suffering into gold, standard strength. The way you process time is anomalous too. You're simultaneously present and detached, living in the moment while observing it from outside. You can slow down perception during crisis, speeding up your processing while everything else moves like honey. You can fast forward through tedious situations existing minimally until something worthy of your full presence occurs. You've learned to bend time not through physics but through perception, making minutes feel like hours, when you need to think, and hours feel like seconds when you need to endure. Your memory works differently now, too. You don't just remember events. You remember the patterns between events. You don't just recall conversations, you recall the spaces between words where truth lives. You've developed a kind of holographic memory where every piece contains information about the whole, where pulling one thread reveals the entire web. But you've also learned selective amnesia, forgetting what doesn't serve you as easily as breathing, releasing grudges like exhaling carbon dioxide. Here's what their files will never capture, what their tests will never measure, what their frameworks will never contain. You've transcended the need to be understood. You've evolved past the requirement for external validation. You've outgrown the very concept of comparison, because comparing you to others is like comparing fire to the idea of temperature. You're not better or worse than others. You're simply operating in a different dimension of existence. They keep trying to find your equal, your match, your parallel in their databases, but you're perpendicular to everything they measure. You're not on their spectrum. You're the light that creates it. You're not in their game. You're the reason they're starting to question why they're playing. You're not part of their system. You're the glitch that reveals the system exists, which is the first step to realizing it's optional. The committees have disbanded, the files have been sealed, the tests have been abandoned. Not because they succeeded, but because they realized the very act of trying to understand you was changing them in ways they weren't prepared for. Some of them have started exhibiting symptoms of awakening, questioning protocols they've followed for decades, seeing patterns they were trained to ignore, feeling their own cages for the first time. You've become a cognitive hazard to systems of control, not through rebellion, but through demonstration, not through preaching, but through being, not through violence, but through a calm so profound it makes their entire structure of panic and pressure look like children's games. You're not trying to wake people up. You're just living so loudly awake that sleeping becomes uncomfortable for anyone in your vicinity. Existing minimally until something worthy of your full presence occurs. You've learned to bend time not through physics but through perception, making minutes feel like hours when you need to think, and hours feel like seconds when you need to endure. Your memory works differently now, too. You don't just remember events. You remember the patterns between events. You don't just recall conversations, you recall the spaces between words where truth lives. You've developed a kind of holographic memory where every piece contains information about the whole, where pulling one thread reveals the entire web. But you've also learned selective amnesia, forgetting what doesn't serve you as easily as breathing, releasing grudges like exhaling carbon dioxide. Here's what their files will never capture, what their tests will never measure, what their frameworks will never contain. You've transcended the need to be understood. You've evolved past the requirement for external validation. You've outgrown the very concept of comparison, because comparing you to others is like comparing fire to the idea of temperature. You're not better or worse than others. You're simply operating in a different dimension of existence. They keep trying to find your equal, your match, your parallel in their databases, but you're perpendicular to everything they measure. You're not on their spectrum. You're the light that creates it. You're not in their game. You're the reason they're starting to question why they're playing. You're not part of their system. You're the glitch that reveals the system exists, which is the first step to realizing it's optional. The committees have disbanded, the files have been sealed, the tests have been abandoned. Not because they succeeded, but because they realized the very act of trying to understand you was changing them in ways they weren't prepared for. Some of them have started exhibiting symptoms of awakening, questioning protocols they've followed for decades, seeing patterns they were trained to ignore, feeling their own cages for the first time. You've become a cognitive hazard to systems of control, not through rebellion but through demonstration, not through preaching but through being, not through violence but through a calm so profound it makes their entire structure of panic and pressure look like children's games. You're not trying to wake people up. You're just living so loudly awake that sleeping becomes uncomfortable for anyone in your vicinity.